So if you look at spiritual discipline, through which you reach a deeper level of understanding, it isn't just according to the ordinary educational principles. So maybe it's a lot to ask for concentration beyond that normal time span. But one thing it really helps you to do, for example, is manage your mind. Because, you know, if you're expecting something to last a certain amount of time and then it goes over that, then you can lose it in your mind. You know what I mean? You decided it was like that, and then it's not like that, and it goes on longer than you expected, and then you just lose it. So actually in the process we're going through, it's not just the ordinary educational process, it's like a spiritual training, it's a spiritual discipline. So please bear that in mind, and also know that of course you need to engage intellectually, that's true, but also something beyond intellectual is occurring. And that's actually usually when you get the deeper insights. Also, one thing I caught from the reflections I heard yesterday evening, and I'm looking a little bit in your books, is that for some people I didn't establish clearly enough why at the beginning we spend so much time talking about something very ideal. Because of course for most people life is not ideal. Life is very far from ideal. You know, of course I got married in 1982 in New York in a Madison Square Gardens with 2,000 other couples. Extraordinary event. And on the banner above it was World Peace Through Ideal Families. And I was there with this incredibly international group of 4,000 plus people, all getting married to one another at the same time. I knew many of them. I didn't know all 4,000, but I knew a lot of them. And they were my friends and colleagues for many years. And we were doing this together for world peace. And that was really important. But if I look back now, 30 years ago to that day, I have to recognize that actually my family's not always been at peace, far less creating world peace. So, why do we need to talk about ideals so much? I want to very shortly try to explain that. So this is a little slide, which is a sort of overview of what the principle's doing. And through this, I hope I can help you to understand why we spend so much time on something that may feel or seem quite unreal compared with the suffering and the difficulties of human life in the world. This is a really helpful analogy because it's talking about this analogy we're going to talk about spiritual health in a sense, but this is talking about physical health. So we need to know what good health is, otherwise we can never gain it, or we don't know how to return to it. So when you're sick, what sort of things do they do? Or if even you don't know you're sick, what does the doctor do? I'm not a medical person, so I can't tell you all of these, but they take your temperature, right? Why do they take your temperature? They want to see if your temperature's at the right level, okay? And they take your blood pressure, right? And they want to see if your blood pressure's in the correct range. And they may do a blood test, and they want to see what's the sugar content in your blood, or what's various different types of content. Even they can catch the first signs of cancer through the blood test. They can catch all sorts of imbalances in your glandular secretions and so on through the blood, through testing the blood. So, but what are they looking for? They're looking for what it should be, and they're trying to check if it isn't what it should be, because that'll be an indication that you're not healthy. And then when they find out you're not healthy, of course they have to do more than find out you're not healthy, they have to try and find out why you're not healthy. What's causing? So my daughter recently had a blood test, my second daughter went to the opticians just to get new glasses, right? And they were doing a test, and they discovered something. And the optician said to her, "Oh, you better go and see your doctor." And that's a bit scary, isn't it? When you're just having your eyes tested for new glasses. So she went to see the doctor, and they discovered that she had an area of her peripheral vision wasn't operational. And then they investigated more what the cause was, and they found a cyst, a growth in the layers surrounding the brain, which was impacting on her visual nerve, creating some pressure in the brain. It's not so serious in her particular case. She went back to the doctor a couple of weeks ago, and again they did a blood test, and they found out that her thyroid gland wasn't operating properly. So you notice something isn't right, and then you try to discover more profoundly the cause. Because only when you can find out the cause can you address the cause and try to get the cure. But through the cure, what are you trying to return to? You're trying to return to normal temperature, normal blood pressure, normal level of secretion from the glands, all sorts of things. But if you don't know what normal is, how can you return to it? So, in a sense, what the contention, what the idea of the divine principle is, this world is not normal. This world is unhealthy. It's not as it ought to be. And when you're not as you ought to be, but you don't understand the functioning of the body, you might even do something to try to make the person better, which is the wrong thing. So I'm not very good at medicine, but I know that now, when children have high temperatures, they remove their clothing, they remove all the bedding, they put cold water on, they try to lower in that way. But I seem to remember when I was a child, decades, almost centuries ago, not quite, there was a different sort of methodology. Methodology changes in medicine when they discover new things and understand more clearly how everything operates. So why do we spend so long talking about something so ideal that none of us live up to it? We might find that exercise even makes us feel bad because, if I think about myself and my wife, of course we long to be truer to God than we are, but I do have regrets. I do have words that came out of my mouth I wish I had not said. There are sometimes struggles in our relationship. And then I think about this beautiful ideal and I feel totally depressed. No, not just totally depressed. What I discover from it is I notice when I'm wrong and I try to head back on what's right. Even I think about my children and I think I know my wife and I know how it ought to be, but maybe we're not that. But what would be my hope for my children? My hope for my children would be they wouldn't just be depressed by the fact that daddy and mummy argue sometimes, but I would help them to understand. Of course, we should set a good example, but I should help them to understand what healthy is. And I should say sorry to them, daddy and mummy weren't always the best example. But I tell you, marriage is a beautiful thing. And you should prepare yourself for it, because daddy and mummy, we were not prepared enough. And then we made this mistake and that mistake, and I want you to really do better. Why would you want them to do better? Because you might say, oh, it doesn't work, so better not to put them into misery. No. You're trying to return to health. Do you understand? But returning to health is not even something you do in one generation, to be honest. So I don't know if you've noticed this. Maybe amongst people you see somebody's circumstance is much more fortunate than another person's, in the sense of their happiness, the balance of their nature, their ability to socialize and make good relationships. I work with children who are very damaged. Some of them were not just damaged in their own life, their parents were damaged, that's why they were damaged. And their parents were damaged because their parents were damaged. And they were damaged because their parents were damaged. I worked with a boy 16 years old. In Britain we have a register for sexual criminals. He was on the register at 16. Why was he on the register at 16? Because his dad and mum were abusing their own children from their early years. And when their children brought their friends home, they abused the friends and they brought their adult friends into abusing together. So this boy was dramatically emotionally affected, even intellectually affected, and he didn't know any other way of life than that way of life. So he ended up on the sexual criminals register at 16 years old. So do you understand? We're in a mess. It's true we're in a mess. How do you get out of a mess? First of all, you need to know the direction you want to take. Then you need to know the problem that's causing you not to be as you ought to be. And then you need to find the cure. So there's a lot more content on the slide, but this is not what I should be lecturing about now. But I'm saying it in case it's helpful. Do you understand? So when you hear about ideals, don't just measure yourself against it and feel bad. Please use it to think about the direction you want to go towards in order to find something better. So, some people give up on what you might call the very purpose of life, because life's been such a struggle. So they give up on love, they give up on family, they give up on things. And maybe we had so many difficult experiences we didn't know how to make it work. Even I have to give up on it myself because my life is towards the end. I should be trying to make sure that other people aren't giving up on it, right? Do you know what I mean? There's somebody else, I can help them to find what I couldn't find, because that's health, do you understand? So that's why we need to know about it. Do you get the point? But of course we also need to know what's gone wrong. So what we're going to study now is, yes, we recognize very clearly the world is not healthy, human life is not healthy, human society is not healthy, there are many difficulties. But what's the cause of the sickness? And then, the next, after this afternoon, we'll start looking at the process to be transformed from sickness back to health, which is in essence to do with transforming my selfish being into a person who can be living for God and others. And then building on that, the restoration process we talk about moves from the individual to the family, nation, etc., ultimately to the world. It's in a sense, religion is teaching a very, very, very important cure, a path of purifying myself in order to return to better health. And this is a discipline that needs to be applied over time. That's why religion is not an instant cure. You can go and you can sing the songs and you can listen to something and can feel uplifted. But extraordinarily, a day later, an hour later, a week later, you'll find you're struggling again. Because the things we need to solve or cure are not easy to cure. That's why we need a very clear understanding of what good health is, what the cause of the sickness is, and what the process of cure is. So I hope that helps a little bit for those of you wondering why we spend so long time talking about something so ideal it seems almost unreal and irrelevant to most people who don't live ideal lives. But it's not irrelevant for this reason. Just one other point I want to cover before I start on the lecture proper, and I try to do it very quickly, and that is, I didn't talk about this one yesterday, but this is expressing life has 3 stages. Actually, also within each there's also stages, but broadly speaking, life has 3 major stages. This is a very interesting stage, and it's the stage from conception to physical birth, right? This is the unborn child inside the mother's womb, inside the placenta. And through the interaction between the unborn child and the placenta, through the umbilical cord, all the nourishment coming from the mother's body, passing through the placenta and reaching the unborn child. It's through the interaction between the unborn child and the placenta that the unborn child can grow and physically mature and develop. In readiness for what? So inside your mother's womb, do you need to have, good eyesight? Do you need to have good lungs? There's many things you don't need to have. But you need to have them not for inside the womb, but you need them absolutely for what comes next. This is the next stage of life. And during that period, if the child and the placenta are not connected properly, and the nourishment isn't flowing from the mother through the placenta to the child, it's a big problem. I was just listening to a very interesting medical program. Again, I don't know all the details, but it's a really interesting thing to look at. And he was talking about analysis of the placenta and the impact of life in the womb on the subsequent physical life of the child. Very interesting. According to the development in the womb, it will determine largely the whole strength of the body and all its susceptibilities, all its weaknesses, all its possibilities to get sick will be determined very strongly by this. And of course this is decided quite a lot by the mother's physical health and nutrition and all these things. But also interestingly, because even the unborn child in the womb is beginning to develop something which is not just physical but also spiritual. There's an interaction between mother and child on that level. It's very interesting. Anyhow, fundamentally, this stage is the preparation for the physical life. It lasts about 40 weeks. And at the end of that stage, it's as if this stage of life dies and we are born into a new life. And when that happens, when the child is born, generally speaking, well, not generally, we tend to discard this. Actually now, they're starting to keep things a bit more. They're keeping umbilical cords and things like this because they want stem cells, right? Very interesting as well. But anyhow, basically we discard this. So or maybe you didn't. Maybe you were like with me, you know, in your hand baggage, you had this little bag and inside was your placenta, you know, and you had it with you. And you were bringing it with you. Did you have your placenta when you came on the plane for your hand baggage? You didn't have it because fundamentally you don't need it anymore, right? It's discarded because it was sustaining you during this period. Similarly, very interesting thought because it's a parallel. It's a very interesting parallel. What the divine principle is expressing is that during your physical lifetime, it's not a lifetime that ends, just as this is a preparation for physical life. So this stage here, second stage, is a preparation for spiritual life. So you have a spiritual nature. When you die, your body will cease to exist, but your spiritual being will not cease to exist. It will pass on to another life. And just like the unborn child doesn't need the placenta anymore, if everything went well, of course, similarly, my spiritual nature, my mind, my heart, doesn't need my body anymore if during my physical lifetime it could get sufficient nourishment. Do you remember we talked about two elements for spiritual growth? The life elements from God and the vitality elements. Where do they come from? Vitality elements come from the good actions performed by your physical self. So we talked about if you study a lot of truth and you know it really well and even you can repeat it, but you don't practice it, you don't grow. So you can get inspiration, love, truth coming to you, but if you don't do anything to manifest that in your own life, to love other people and to live for the sake of others and to practice truth, you will not spiritually grow. You will get blocked. So you see people who are very intellectually developed in the sense they know a lot of things, but actually in life they're not able to manifest it. Do you understand? So you need this one to grow that one. But then when this one passes to the next life, it should have had all the nourishment from your good life of good action, just like the unborn child needed to get all the nourishment from the placenta. So just like the placenta is discarded, so the physical body is discarded and the spirit moves on to the next stage. Very interestingly, of course, this is suggesting this is the final destination. It's as opposed to 80 years or 90 years or whatever, this is for eternity. So maybe we can think more about that later. Okay, so now I want to start the lecture. So you remember this one. I don't know why that disappeared. Anyhow. So be fruitful, multiply. Somehow multiply disappears, I don't know why. And have dominion. These are the three blessings. So this is health. We're suggesting this is health. That's why it's good to know about it. And this is not just health. More profoundly, this is the purpose of our life, which we did not decide by ourselves. It was decided by the Creator. Okay. So this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Looks like a sort of fat pen, right? It's got a clip like a pen. But if you try to write with it, it doesn't do it. You try to turn it or twist it or push it so that the point comes out and you can write, it doesn't do it. And if you didn't know what it was, you might think, well, that's a no good pen. You could throw it away because you don't know its purpose. But then, of course, you would see these little buttons, right? There's a green one, there's a red one. And you can even push them both at the same time. You get green and red. Anyhow, so probably you'd work it out without too much difficulty, right? But what I'm simply trying to say, if you don't know the purpose of something, how will you use it correctly? It's impossible to do so. So although it has much potential to achieve many wonderful things, you don't know what the purpose is, you'll never achieve the purpose because you don't know what it is. You'll not be able to use it and fulfill its potential. So it's very important in life that we know our potential. So I think this morning, Reverend Franklin Fortune, he was talking about our value. How much is our value? How much is our worth? And we need to know about it. It's really important. So that's why we need to know about this one. And these are the three. Also, very importantly, yesterday I tried to explain, if you like, the pattern of life that brings goodness into being, that realizes goodness. And this pattern of life, we called it the four-position foundation. God, the subject, well, God who has subject and object within his own being. God who, when he creates, always creates separate subject, separate object. But their destiny is to live for the sake of each other. And when they live for the sake of each other, they become one. And when they become one, through their investment, through their give and take action, when they become one, they resemble God. Or, in another sense, they fulfill the purpose that God had when he created them in the first place. So now I got myself a pen, right? Do you remember I talked about a pen yesterday? I was talking about a whiteboard pen, but I wanted to talk about a pen that does this. How does that pen do that? It does it because the pen and the cap have such an intimate relationship with one another. They are absolutely made for the sake of each other, right? If they were not, how would it do that? If they made the caps in Athens and the pens in London, and they never spoke to each other, and they didn't even know the other one existed, and there was a lorry of pens, going through Albania or wherever it is next door to Greece, coming from London, and a lorry of caps coming from Athens, going I know not where, and they both fell over on the motorway, and someone picked up a cap and picked up a pen, and they just... Amazing. In other words, these do not fit together accidentally. Do you understand? They were designed. They come from a common origin. They were designed to fit together. They don't fit together by accident. They fit together as a pen and a cap because of a design and because of a purpose, right? But you don't know the purpose, then... Also, very interesting, this pen. The cap doesn't just fit on there. Also, you don't lose it because it fits on there too. Isn't that great? It's not an accident, it's a design. So if you don't know the purpose, if you don't know the designer's mind and heart, it's very difficult to fulfill the purpose through your good give and take action and to realize the purpose. So yesterday's lectures talked about the whole structure, which is a very simple structure whereby we can fulfill the purpose. So very, very interesting content. Next big problem. Life is a mess. Life is a misery. Life is full of pain, destruction, hurt, disappointment, disillusionment. The things you long for, you struggle to achieve and don't achieve them. This type of position. And this is a biblical verse. Very poignant, painful biblical verse written by St. Paul. I do not understand my own actions. Why? Because I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. For I know that nothing good dwells... Well, maybe leave that bit, because we go to this bit. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil that I do not want is what I do. Isn't that an amazing statement? I end up doing what I don't want to do, and not doing what I do want to do. Isn't that really strange? How's that possible? How does that come about? How can we be so... you might say, it's a design fault, right? You know, if there was a design fault, the cat would be very big, do you understand? The pen would be very small, and you would try to do the click thing, and you wouldn't, and the cat would be so loose that it wouldn't stop the pen drying out, and it wouldn't work, or the cat would be so small it wouldn't go on the pen. It's a design fault. So, is all of human misery a design fault problem? You know, men were never made for women, and women were never made for men because it's such a disaster. It's so difficult to get on with one another. How could we possibly? It's a design fault, you know. Or the fact that my mind can't control my body so that I do what I want to do instead of doing what I don't want to do. That's a design fault. Is the world suffering from a design fault? The principal's answer, no, it isn't suffering from a design fault. There's nothing wrong with the design. So what is it then? The mystery of Satan and evil. That's what this is talking about. If everything God created was good, where does Satan and evil come from? This is many people's very profound objection to religion, especially religion that talks about the devil and evil and things like this. What sort of stuff is that? Why is God's purpose of creation not fulfilled? The world of the three blessings, joy for God and humanity, why isn't it our everyday common reality? Why is it so difficult to taste it and experience it? Well, in a sense, the answer is very simple. It's because we're not living according to the proper order, the proper lawful order. And most importantly, there's something wrong with our heart. There's something wrong with our mind. And we end up doing what we don't want to do. Of course, when you do it, you sort of want to do it. But your best self doesn't want to do it. You know, when my wife said something I thought was unkind, and out of my mouth came the words back, I told myself so many times, don't do it. And yet I did it again. What sort of idiot am I? Why didn't I think first, my wife's German, I'm English, she's a woman, I'm a man. She's a different person from me. She doesn't see everything like I see it. Why should she have to see it like I see it? Why does she have to say it like I say it? She comes from a different culture and a different background. So what sort of idiot am I that I just say something back to her? What a stupid thing to do. But I do it. I do it. You know, because in that moment I lose my wisdom, I lose my understanding. I don't conduct myself according to the principle. I get frustrated and upset and so on. So if God is good and almighty and knows what's going on, why does he allow people to suffer? That's a huge theological question, right? Huge question. Would God make something like this? This would truly, truly be a design fault. You know, would you make something that wants to achieve something and that actually has a nature within it that prevents it from achieving it? In other words, you're destined to be unfulfilled, to be miserable, because what you want you cannot do. If God made something like that, what sort of unpleasant, nasty God is that God? Do you understand? If sowed within me is the very nature that prevents me achieving what my heart is longing for, what would that be? That would be a very cruel God. Do you understand? Very cruel God. What the principal's contention is, there isn't a design fault. God didn't make us like this, and yet this is our current reality. So how did it get to be like that? If you have such a conflict, then your value is greatly diminished. I used to, when I explained to young people, I explained, you go out, you buy a vacuum cleaner. You know a vacuum cleaner? For cleaning the floor, cleaning the curtains, cleaning around the house. It sucks, right? You go out, you buy a vacuum cleaner, you start using it, it's done a great job all over the house, and then you go into your living room and you start to vacuum, and instead of sucking, it blows. And everything that's in the bag, all the dirt, all the dust, all the junk comes out. Because the vacuum cleaner has a contradictory nature. It's supposed to suck, but it was blowing instead. What do you do with such a vacuum cleaner? You send it to the repair shop, right? They repair it, they bring it back to you, you use it again, and the same problem comes out again. What do you have to do? And then you've got to throw it away. Because it's got a contradictory nature. What if it's not a vacuum cleaner? What if it's your dad? What if it's your mum? What if it's your boss? What if it's your husband? What if it's your wife? This is a serious problem. So when husband and wives get together, they promise each other things, right? And they mean it, but they oftentimes do not deliver. Do you understand? This man gets this woman pregnant and he doesn't deliver. Children are born and he's not even there to deliver. Do you know what I mean? This is reality. And yet when he said, I love you and I want to have your children, was he being completely insincere? Of course, sometimes they were being completely insincere. They didn't mean a word of it. But sometimes they were being very sincere. But they cannot deliver. Because they have a contradictory nature. But that's not original. It's not original. So how does it come about? So we're going to delve into an ancient story like David was talking about. 3,500 plus years ago. What on earth would this have to tell us? How could something so ancient, so mythical, such an apparently impractical story offer us anything? Well, actually, in all the great traditions, there are many sources of wisdom like this one. And they're basically in the form of a story. And you have to read something very deeply into the story to understand its meaning. So, when Father Moon had this amazing experience with Jesus and felt the incredible sorrow of God when he was 16 years old and living in a country dominated by another culture, dominated by the Japanese, where people were really suffering and miserable, he met with Christ, he met with God, and he felt the tears of God. And then he thought, why is the world in such a mess? How can I make it a better place? How can I liberate God? He had to really research this. He really researched this. And he came up with an insight, which if you think about it deeply, is actually extremely meaningful. So I want to look at this insight into this particular story. So you probably, I hope all of you are aware of this story about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So we'll look at it, try to understand it. So anyhow, this picture is a sort of summary of the basic story. They're in a garden, a sort of ideal world, and in this garden there are two trees at the very center. Tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. Then there's the first man, the first woman, there's a serpent, and there's a fruit. And God says very clearly, don't eat the fruit, this particular fruit of course, the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, whatever that may be. Do you know any fruit, any trees called the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Are there any out there? Or any in the, there's olive trees and there's all sorts of trees, but there's none of those trees. But God said very clearly, you eat that fruit and you're going to die. But one day it says the serpent, unusual, speaking snake, talks to Eve, says, persuades her to eat the fruit. She eats the fruit, and then she passes it to Adam, he eats the fruit too, and something dramatic occurs through which they're thrown out of this ideal world, as it were, or this garden. Such is the story, but the principal's insight is this is a symbolic story. So if you took it very literally, right, what would you do? What would be your plan of action? If this is literally the cause of all human misery, and the reason that we find it very difficult to achieve our heart's desire, and that we end up doing wrong things instead of the things we want to do, what would be your plan of action? If this is literally true, what would be the first thing you would do?
All the trees to cut down.
Right, cut down all the fruit trees, right? Burn them. Make sure there's no more fruit, right? What would be the next thing, or maybe even before that, what would you do?
Yeah, you catch all the snakes. You kill all the snakes. Kill all the snakes, especially any that speak. Get rid of those ones. And then cut down all the fruit trees. Make sure there's no fruit. Now, please don't misunderstand. I'm not making fun of the Bible. I'm not meaning to do that. But what I'm saying is this story is there to convey something very profoundly important that we can use to discover the cause of the problem and resolve it. So, is the cause of the problem fruit? Everybody who ate peaches this morning, like I did, really liked peaches. You're going to have a problem throughout not just through the day, but for the rest of your life. Is that reality? We know it isn't. Similarly, most of the people, I'm trying to make sure my children avoid certain beings. What sort of beings do I want my children to avoid? I don't want them fundamentally to avoid. A long time ago, because we were about, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years old, I don't remember exactly. But he went out and bought dry cleaning fluid from the shop, and he was sniffing it. And he got me to do it too. And very, very fortunately, I didn't continue on the path, do you understand? But that's what we're trying to avoid. That sort of interaction. Do you see what I mean? It's going to destroy your life, take you in the wrong direction. Okay, so I just want to establish that base. So the principle very quickly goes through a process of identifying. I mean, Adam, that's pretty clear. Implication is first man. Eve, that's pretty clear, first woman. But what about this tree? Is it a tree? What about this tree and the fruit on it? Is it fruit? What about this serpent? Is it really a serpent? The principles inside, these are symbols. These are symbols. And if you understand what their symbols are, the story takes on a very profound meaning, which it never had here before. So profound is the meaning that it will tell you what the cause of your unhappiness is. And when you know the cause of your unhappiness, you'll be able to find the cure and you'll be able to get healthy again. That's what this is actually about. So it's very, very interesting. So I've got to really speed up a bit. Anyhow, this is just some passages from that story. It's very interesting. It says they were in this ideal world and they were both naked, but they were not ashamed. And then the woman said to the serpent, God said, you must not eat the fruit from the tree, and you must not touch it, or you will die. And then the serpent says to her, you will not surely die. He gives an alternative view and persuades her that she actually will grow up and experience something extraordinary if she eats it. And then she took some of the fruit and she ate it. And she also gave some to the man, and he ate it too. And then they made coverings for themselves. So it's interesting. They eat fruit and they make coverings for themselves. What did they cover? They covered their heads, they covered their mouths, they covered their noses. What did they cover? They covered, it says in the Bible, their lower parts. It means the sexual areas of their bodies are what they cover. Interesting they should do that. So what are the two trees? They say they're the two trees in the center of the garden. So I'm going to, you could read this in much more detail in the Divine Principle book. I'm going to try and go rather quickly. The principle makes the conclusion that this tree is not a tree. It represents a person. This tree is not a tree, it represents another person. Well, it's not difficult to imagine who they might be because there's only two people around in the story, but it represents Adam and Eve, right? So the principle mentions many passages in the Bible where a vine or a tree is taken as a symbol of a human being. So again, I'll skip over that quite quickly, but there are many such instances. And one of these two trees, right, there's the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This tree of life is mentioned quite a lot of times in the scripture. It says in Genesis, after they ate the fruit, that the way to the tree of life was blocked because God put an angel there with a flaming sword to block the way. That's the first book of the Bible, right? This is the last book of the Bible, and it describes the situation. It says, the people who wash their clothes white will have the right to reach the tree of life. So what is this tree of life? The Principle book claims this tree of life is Adam in his maturity. Why Adam in his maturity? Because what Adam was longing for was to grow up and reach his maturity. This is a common longing. Isn't it extraordinary? You know, when we're young, we're waiting to be grown up. When we're old, we wish we were young. It tends to be like that. So, any young people, they're longing for being grown up and being mature. Or as it says in Proverbs, a desire fulfilled is a tree of life, but a hope deferred makes the heart sick. So that's just those quotations about the tree of life. So our solution to turn this story into something really incredibly useful and very insightful is the tree of life is man in perfection, which was Adam's greatest desire. But he lost it. He lost the way to perfection, to maturity in love through the fall. So what's the other tree? Not entirely surprisingly, the principle concludes the other tree, which is only mentioned in the Bible in that story, is actually woman. It's the woman. And why the tree of knowledge of good and evil? In a sense, because woman bears the fruit. And whether she bears good fruit or bad fruit will depend upon the way in which those fruit, in a sense, are conceived. The way in which the love out of which they are born, if you like. This is a very profound point, of course. What about the serpent? Is this a literal snake? Again, the principle is very clear it isn't. Because it's able to talk. It knew some very profound truths. And also the principle's contention is that this being, which of course we associate with evil, was not originally evil. It must be something good, because it too is made by God. But there must have been some way that something good made by God became corrupted, became bad. So that's a very interesting matter as well. And actually this is some quotations about Revelations, again the last one. The ancient serpent is, it says, Satan. And in another interesting passage in the Old Testament, it talks about angels falling from heaven, falling with his angels. It talks about Lucifer falling with his angels. This is in Isaiah. Lucifer being an archangel, the most prominent leading angel along with other archangels. So what's all this about? There's lots of important points here, and there's a sort of train of logic. But of course in these lectures we're trying to cover quite a lot of points. So, was Satan created by God? In other words, the source of evil, as described in Judeo-Christian and Islamic scripture, is Satan made by God? No, the answer is Satan is not made by God, but Satan was not originally Satan. What the principle is expressing is Satan was originally a good being, an archangel, but something happened and a good being became a bad being. God creates only good. Satan did not exist with God from the beginning. If Satan existed from the beginning, it has huge theological implications. What would it mean? It would mean from the beginning there's a source of good and a source of evil. Then it's very easy to understand everything's contradiction. And human beings are pulled between two opposing forces. But the principle's view is that's not the case. If you like, there isn't a design for it. There isn't a contradiction from the origin. The origin is not in contradiction. The origin is one, the origin is God. That's why the rest of the universe is fundamentally existing in an extraordinary balance and harmony. That whole pattern of give and take action, between subject and object, centering on the purpose, which calls things into harmony. We saw the bird inside the crocodile's mouth. We saw the moth on the flower. The world is just full of this extraordinary harmonious interaction in the natural world. So who is the serpent then? This is, those of you who are not so scripturally rooted maybe and not so aware of the spiritual world, this is quite a challenging thought. The principles explain the serpent isn't a snake. The serpent is a spiritual being, an angelic being in the spiritual world. And not just any old angel, but an absolutely top of the hierarchy angel. You look in the scripture, there's this very interesting passage in a very small book in the New Testament called the Book of Jude. And it talks about the crime of the angels. Maybe we don't normally associate angels with crimes. It says, and the angels who did not keep their proper positions, God has kept them in darkness, bound with everlasting chains. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They served as an example of those who suffered the punishment of eternal fire. So it's connecting angels and sexual immorality and perversion. connecting them to illicit or illegal sexual relationship. So what crime did not only the archangel commit, but the archangel committed it with Adam and Eve. So after Adam and Eve's crimes, they were ashamed of their sexual parts, and they made aprons from fig leaves to cover their sexual parts. Before they were naked and unashamed, afterwards they had to cover their nakedness. So again, the implication is here that they were ashamed of their sexual parts, which they were not ashamed of before. But please remember, this is a story with a hidden meaning. If you understand deeply the meaning, you can find out some very key information to end human misery and suffering and make a better world. This is what we're in search of. This will really help us. This will be very important piece of information. So, was it a fruit? No, definitely not a fruit. Would God have made some sort of fruit and said to us, don't eat it? And then this was like a test. Would we be obedient to God? So do I make something really delicious, put it on the table for that my children really love, the most delicious Italian ice cream. Put it in the middle of the table and I say to my children, little children, younger children, they are, mine are now, don't eat it. And then I leave and I see, and if they do eat it, I get out the machine gun or whatever it is and I mow them down because they've been disobedient and I kill them. Is that normal parental conduct? Is that the sort of model that we imagine comes from the Creator to human life? No, it certainly is not. Clearly is not. So, what sort of fruit is so desirable that even though you're told if you eat it you'll die, you won't eat it. You will eat it, beg your pardon. So, before we go to the buffet at dinner time, if someone says the third tray on the first buffet thing, that's got poison in, just warning you, if you eat it you're going to die. How many people are going to go there? Only the ones who didn't hear the announcement, right? And hopefully, because you're good people, aren't you, those of you who heard it will stop them eating it. Maybe you might even be mindful enough to take it away and put it in the bin or incinerate it or whatever to make sure no one does eat it, right? And you might have a slight argument with the hotel why they put it there in the first place. So, what sort of fruit is more desirable in life? There's no such fruit, actually. Interestingly also, Jesus expressed what goes into a man's mouth, in other words food, does not make him unclean. But what comes out of his mouth, that is actually what makes him unclean. So in other words, it's not what you physically consume that damages your character. It's what you say, what you do, how you act. That's what destroys you. So what is the fruit? The principle is very clear. The fruit is not a fruit. The fruit is talking about sexual life. Why we come to that conclusion, even just knowing something of the culture of that time? Well, anyhow, in terms of nature, of course, trees reproduce through their fruit. And people have children through their sexual life. So there's a parallel there. Not only that, but in the scriptural writings of the time, the poetry of the time, the culture of the time, to know somebody meant to have sexual relations with them. So the tree of knowledge. And there were many euphemisms, that means many ways of talking about sex without using the word. And they were understood by people at the time. So to know a woman meant to have a sexual relationship with them. Or to eat the fruit, and could relate to that point. Or even to know good and bad was a euphemism, it means a poetic language representing sexual promiscuity. A very interesting passage here from Proverbs, talking about adultery, unlawful sexual conduct. This is the way of the adulteress. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wrong. Eats and wipes her mouth. What's that about? It's using this symbolic language of eating to represent the sexual transgression, sexual misconduct. So I want to remind you of this one, which we talked about before. So of these four loves here, which is the most complete, in a sense? Do you remember? Parents' love. Because, you know, when you... does it do it still? Yes, it does. If you bring up... Oh, no, sorry. If you bring up the whole diagram, you've got God's love. When it grows on earth, it starts off as children's love, becomes brothers and sisters' love, develops from that into husband and wife love, spouses' love, develops from there into parental love, and each one includes the preceding one. So parental love includes all the other loves. So parents' love is most complete in a sense, and most completely represents the totality of the love of God. But of the four loves, the most critical is this one. Because this place decides whether or not the love of God finds a place to come down to and manifest itself, not as something invisible that's going on inside of God, but something that comes out from God towards His creation and finds a place that it can dwell and be received and become substantially manifested in the love between a husband and wife, such as when the husband sows his seed in the wife's egg, the love and the motivation, the heart and the intention and the quality of the union that takes place here is exactly an effect that's true to this cause. This is the principle, do you understand? Why do we study all that stuff about four-position foundation, three objects purpose? What do we do all that for? It's to explain the lawful mode of conduct in order to realize the world that God intended. So the force of give and take action should be totally true to the force of universal primality. Or the love of God should be absolutely resembled by the love between the husband and wife to make the place they meet in love, not just one another, but this place they make is, through their love for each other, a profound expression of their love for God. In fact, their love for each other is even motivated and rooted in their love for God. And they recognize the love of God in the precious gift of my wife or the precious gift of my husband. So, this is a very profound teaching. And you can learn about it, and you can feel that is something very meaningful. I really think I would like to have a husband like that. I really think I would like to have a wife like that. And you can feel very good about it. And most people, when they get married, they may not know this fully, but they have some sense for it. That's why traditionally all marriages were take part as part of a religious ceremony, right? And people made very profound commitments to one another in that religious ceremony. But what the principle is saying is this is the most decisive place in human life. If you make this place right, everything can flow. You make this place wrong, God isn't present, doesn't come down, true love doesn't flow. This type of give and take action is not consistent with God's love, not according to God's purpose. Through the give and take action, this man is exploiting this woman is cheating this man, and they're taking advantage of one another, they're exploiting and misusing each other. Then not surprisingly, what comes from it and the love that can pass from it is extremely not as it ought to be. So this is in a sense the most precious place in human life, and similarly it's the most decisive place to decide the future. It's decided here, more than any other place. So you study any type of psychology or any type of understanding, but this is plainly clear, actually, that it is so. So what is actually the fruit? It's actually sexual love. So of course, men and women are not just supposed to meet physically, they're supposed to meet in love. And on the foundation of love, motivation, commitment, they're supposed to make this place. If it happens some other way, of course, it has a very different type of outcome. Although the outcome in terms of conception and children being born may be the same. So, what's the principle saying through the story? The principle is saying that the snake that spoke to Eve wasn't a snake, it was an angelic being. And when it said to Eve, eat the fruit, this wasn't about eating fruit. This was about the temptation to engage in sexual relationship. So the male angel and the female human being had a sexual relationship. who is Eve? Eve is obviously a physical being. You see this orange shape here. This, lighter orange shape. This means Eve's physical nature. This darker orange, almost red, this represents Eve's spiritual being. Spiritual being. Spiritual being in the spiritual world, of course you have a spiritual mind, but you also have a spiritual body. Just as in the physical world, you have a physical body and a physical mind. So what the principle is saying is the angel and Eve could actually have sexual intercourse, spiritual body to spiritual body. And that's what the temptation is referring to. And then when Eve gave the fruit to Adam, what's it talking about? It's talking about Eve as a physical and spiritual being, having sexual relationships with Adam as a physical and spiritual being. So what does that mean then? Is sex evil? Clearly, definitely, sexual relationships, sexual love is not evil. Rather, it is the very core and center of creating that ideal world. So why would it be that God would say to Adam and Eve, don't eat? Why should they not eat? Well, actually, this again is not so mysterious. So, the town I live in, on the seaside in England, it has a big problem. It has a drug problem, because there's a lot of social housing. A lot of people moved out of London because of their social difficulties. They rehoused where I live because it's cheap. It has one of the highest drug problems. It has one of the highest teenage pregnancy problems. So why is teenage pregnancy a problem? Because it's better that children don't have children. Because when children have children, they lack the resources to look after the children because they haven't grown up yet in the love of their parents. And usually the very fact they are pregnant is because of the difficulty in the relationship between themselves and their parents. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. So when should you not have sexual relationship? Of course you should have sexual relationship. Who created the sexual organs? God did. But you shouldn't eat during the period of growing up. You should eat when you've reached maturity, right? Then you're free to eat. This is very sensible, right? Very sensible. And very important. So as I said, when we were doing this very serious task of assessing whether children should stay with their physical parents or not, the key criteria was, could the parents look after the children's physical and spiritual needs? If they not only couldn't look after them, but they were causing them potentially great physical danger or great spiritual danger. We talked about emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. If the children are in real danger, you have to remove them, from the circumstance. So don't eat before maturity. In other words, don't engage in the sexual relationship as some sort of childish, immature, self-centered, pleasure-seeking action, when actually the consequences are so profound for yourself and for the other person, and of course ultimately potentially for the children that might come from the relationship. So that's the point. The commandment was not forever. The commandment was only during the growing period. So if actually Adam and Eve had the sexual relationship not here, but here, in their immaturity, then the result, the consequences are profound. The consequences are profoundly damaging. And this is reality in the actual world in which we live. People engage in something that should be so deep and so meaningful without the level of maturity to enable it to happen. This is very damaging. So are we not, in a society which has become increasingly liberal, are we not still absolutely shocked and cannot accept at all when an adult seduces a child into sexual relationship? Even in very, very liberal societies, we don't think that's a great idea. Because that's clearly absolutely exploitation. I tell you, even between adults it can be exploitation too. But anyhow, when an adult seduces a child into that relationship, anyhow, I better go a bit quicker, so you get the point, I think. So what we're talking about is this story represents Adam and Eve engaging in a sexual relationship, but without being able to create the place in the midst of their relationship where the love of God could come down, which is what they would be able to do when they reached spiritual maturity, where they fulfilled the first blessing, if you like. So this then has a very big impact. Originally, the love of God should come down and pass to the next generation from this place, the place of conjugal life, the place of sexual relations. But actually, what we're expressing instead is this became the place, not resembling God's love, if you like, but of course, in a sense, it's the same. It's a give and take action between man and woman. It's sex. Sex is sex is sex is sex. It's all the same, but it isn't the same. What's different about it? What's different about it is the heart and motivation that lies behind it. So think of the difference between rape. Think of the difference between paedophilia and pure, true, unselfish giving of myself out of absolute commitment in love forever and the rest of my life to somebody else, out of which we want to bear children and love them with all our lives. Those are very, very different matters, right? Same mechanism, same two beings, but very different outcomes, according to the quality of the give and take action. Okay, I'm going to stop there because it's 15:15 and some of you are looking a bit exhausted. Well done. Remember, it's a spiritual discipline, right? Especially for us all.